morning, and thank you for joining us for the Pre-State Allocation Board meeting as well as our webcast. Today's meeting is at 2 o'clock at the State Capitol, room 447. And to show you, we've had some activity with fund releases between July and August. We've released approximately $160 million, give or take. For those of you who received an apportionment for the last priorities and funding round, your 5005s are due by Tuesday. That's on September 25th. As a reminder, we have to have the signed hard copies in the office by close of business. We cannot accept faxes or scanned copies, so please plan accordingly. We have quite a few outstanding 5005s still out there, and we know we have lots of construction, so please ensure you plan and bring them in by Tuesday. This slide depicts the new construction remaining bond authority for propositions 4755 and 1D. In totality, you can see we're almost exhausted with the majority of our apportionments that are available left. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Brian LePasse, who will provide some highlights of today's State Allocation Board meeting.
Good morning. Welcome to the Pre-SAB. I'm going to go through some of the agenda highlights we have today. We have quite a few. Today's a fairly heavy agenda. A lot of important and very interesting items today too, so I think it'll be an interesting board. The first item I'm going to talk about this morning is last month the State Allocation Board moved to reserve about $53.7 million, which would represent the current fiscal year plus 2 more fiscal years of administrative costs to administer the program. This includes costs for OPSC to process, also the state treasurer's office. They have a component in this where they help us reconcile our funds, release funds, things of that nature. Also, the Department of Education, as you all know, plays a role. They help us with our plan approval letters and, you know, kind of helping the districts through the process as far as their educational specifications and the things that they have oversight over. And also, some of those costs go to the California School Finance Authority. They help us with our charter school projects, among other things, to make sure that the districts apply and have financial soundness and things like that. So last month, the board approved a carve-out of, and this is per statute, this is what we've always done in the past. The administrative costs for the program always come out of our bonds. And like I said, it's about $53.7 million to represent three fiscal years worth of costs. And last month, the idea was that those costs would be taken from the bonds in a prorated way according to the remaining bond authority and any of the pots that we still have bond authority remaining. So you kind of look on a percentage basis and carve it out that way to add up to the amount that we need. That is reflected in this month's status of funds. So if you have a tab book, I believe it's tab 6 in the book, the status of funds will depict exactly where the funds came from, and you can look at that. This item is just to affirm from the board if they would like to continue that path or if they'd like to maybe choose something different, because they did express the desire to maybe take a look at it. They approved the cost, but they wanted to maybe take a look at it based on workload and a couple other things. So that's really what this item is just to kind of say, is this the way you want to move forward, or do you want to do something different, kind of see how they want to go. So we shall see about that. The next item is Overcrowded Relief Grant Program. We have had a total of 9 funding cycles so far for ORG, and that's it's represented 108 projects that have been approved for about $689 million. We're in the midst right now of a 10th cycle, and we're estimating, I believe, about $113 million in need for the 10th cycle for 23 projects. They're being processed right now, so we don't know the exact amount that's going to come out on the end once we process them, but that's what we're thinking, we're estimating. It's about $113 million worth. which will leave us with a little over $100 million, about $104 million in unreserved authority for the program. So kind of going back a little bit, the board last year at this time asked us to provide 2 more funding cycles, a 9th and a 10th cycle. We've already had the 9th cycle. We're in the midst of the 10th cycle. But they didn't approve anything past that. So this item presents them 4 options on how to move forward with the remaining authority. And they're essentially similar options, but they do have a little bit of differences to them. The first one would be to approve 2 more cycles consistent with what they did last year, so that'd be an 11th and 12th cycle. Another option would be to approve 1 funding cycle, just an 11th cycle, and then go back to the board for permission on what to do after that. The third option would be to approve multiple funding cycles, so maybe 4 of them, 5 of them, 6 of them, however many, but they can't exceed 2 per calendar year. And then the last option would be just a continuous twice per year funding cycle until all the funds are gone. Of course, if we run out, if we approve a few cycles and then we run out of funds, we're going to be out of funds anyways. But those are the 4 different options that we have in the item, and I believe we're recommending option 1, which would be to create an 11th and 12th cycle. We're pretty sure that, I guess I'm pretty sure that an 11th and 12th cycle would most likely result in the funds being exhausted anyway. So we'll kind of see how that goes today, but basically that's all this is an informational item for the board, sharing with them kind of the history of the program, what we have in-house for the current cycle, and then how they want to move forward with the remaining funds after that. Now this item, this is going to be very interesting. Last month, the board asked staff to formulate regulations to address how to accept applications once bond authority has been exhausted. Kind of stepping back a little bit, the background on this. As you know, our current regulations require, or they stipulate that when we do run out of bond funds, we will create what I refer to as a true unfunded list, and that means we're approving projects, we're processing them, and we're putting them on a list, and we don't have authority for those projects. Now, this gets a little confusing because we have unfunded lists. We use that term quite a bit. So we really have 2 kinds of unfunded lists, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit right now. The unfunded list that we've been working with for a little while recently is it's an unfunded approvals list. So we have bond authority for projects. We just don't have the ability to continuously fund them the way that we did in the past. About 2 years ago, we lost that ability. State's fiscal crisis and so forth didn't really allow us the pleasure of continuously funding and releasing funds of these projects on a flow basis the way that we had been doing through the pooled money investment account, the pooled money investment board. Instead, what we do now is we have a mechanism called priority funding. And just to kind of briefly cover it for those of you that don't know what this is, which is probably none of you, but I'll discuss it anyways. We approve projects, we process them fully through the office, through CDE, DSA, OPSC, and we take them to the board for approval. We put them on an unfunded approvals list in the order that they were processed and received. And then when the state's able to sell bonds to provide cash for those projects, we then take them forward and we actually fund them and give them apportionments and release the funds. So that's the unfunded approvals list. The other unfunded list that I'm referring to that these regulations will address is when we're completely out of bond authority, which is where we're at. We're getting to that point right now. And that would be project approvals that we don't have authority for. So in the past, we have done this. We've run out of money in the last decade a couple different times, and we would create this list of projects that have come in past the authority, and the idea being it's providing, you're showing an unmet need. It'll perhaps help with a future bond initiative, that type of thing. And the idea was always that a future bond fund would come, or a future voter-approved bond initiative would come forward, and we'd be able to fund those projects. There was a little bit of concern moving forward with that same method currently, and the reasons that the board has talked about, there's a couple of them they mentioned in particular, which were, if we create this list of approved projects, it's essentially a liability for the state. I think right now we all know that the state's going through quite a few fits and throws as far as, fiscally speaking, and they didn't want that kind of liability on the state. The other thing is there's been an interest lately of, re-examining the school facility program. It's been around now since late 1998. I think it's worked very well, but it's also become very complex, and I think there's a lot of interest out there, not just by the board, but by stakeholders and everyone else, to maybe examine the program and take a look at some of the things we could do to make enhancements or improve the program. So that's another concern they had. If we're approving projects under the current program, under the current rules, and then we move forward with some program changes, what is that going to mean? Are those projects going to be able to be funded? If there's significant changes, would they even be in alignment with whatever those changes are once we do get a bond in the future? So therefore, last month, the board decided to, moving forward, create regulation changes that would change the way that we do our unfunded approvals and the way we look at projects that are submitted beyond authority. So what these regulations do is a few things. We will still have an intake review. So when these projects are submitted, our application review team will take a look at them. They're going to make sure that it has all the components needed to process an application, but it would stop there. We wouldn't actually fully process the application. We would just take a look to make sure it has the components necessary. We'd receive it, and we would put it on what's being referred to as a board acknowledged projects list. And I think we all can see that the numbers on those lists, the funding requests, would be very raw. They wouldn't be perfected because they're not going to be processed. And so it would be just an estimated amount of need for those projects. So another component of these regulations would be, actually, before I get to that, this would take effect. It's not currently in effect. Right now, their current regulations are still active, and so we will be processing any applications that we have or that we get, that we already have or that we get that are past authority for a true unfunded list, like I was speaking about earlier. Once these regulations, if they're adopted by the board and they're approved by the Office of Administrative Law, once they take effect, that's the demarcation line, the bright line where we would start to initiate this new process where we're just receiving them, looking at the intake review, and then putting them on an acknowledged list, estimated amounts. I feel like I'm forgetting something here. Currently, we have already received $116 or so million of modernization funding requests past the authority that we had remaining, and also we've received about $58 million in worth of projects in new construction. So we are, we already have quite a few projects that have been submitted past that we will be processing. And again, anything that we get between now and the point when the regulations are effective, we're going to also be processing those fully. Also part of the regulations is a requirement to submit a school board resolution with the application package. And what it will say is basically it's an acknowledgement by the school board that there are no existing bond authority. There is no existing bond authority for the project that's being requested, and acceptance of by the OPSC of that application does not constitute any kind of guarantee of future funding. And there's a lot of other things in those resolutions too. And I wanted to stress to you that this is a very nutshell summary that I'm giving you right now of what these regulations would mean for all of you moving forward. And we are planning on doing outreach on this. If they're approved, if they're going to be moving forward, we are going to be doing outreach to give everybody a deeper level of understanding and really talk about what this will mean for your projects and how you go forward with planning. And we think that all this information will help you with those things. So we are planning on that in the near future. Keep your eyes peeled for that. It'll be on our website. I'm sure we'll send out email blasts and so forth, our normal means of communicating all of our different events, but that is something that we're going to be doing in the near future. I wanted to mention financial hardship too. Currently, when you come in for financial hardship requests, you have to have OPSC approval of your financial hardship status prior to submitting your application. It's part of your application requirement. with these new regulations, if you are requesting financial hardship assistance for those projects that are passed beyond the authority we have, you will not need to have financial hardship approval prior to coming into OPSC. You can log your request, financial hardship assistance, on your application. We will put it on the acknowledged projects list that way. And you won't be required to have financial hardship approval until such a time that there's bond authority available for those projects or that we're processing them. So, whatever point in the future, we're not sure at this point what's going to happen down the line. At whatever point in the future we do process those or we do get bond authority, that's when we'll reevaluate or evaluate your financial hardship status. So I think that about covers it. I wanted to stop and ask if anybody had questions before I move on to the next item on this one. Okay, I'm not seeing any. Also, we are requesting to have these regulations filed on an emergency basis. So if the board likes what they see today and they approve them, we are asking that they let us file them on an emergency basis, which will make the rulemaking process a little bit quicker. Actually, before I get to this one, I want to mention too, there's an item in our report section about the program review. And I mentioned that just a minute ago, that the board is interested in looking at the various aspects of the program and how we could make improvements or changes, what needs to be done. They have expressed a few concerns with a few areas, and we do have an item today that's kind of work as a discussion starter. They're setting aside an amount of time to discuss this today at today's meeting, and I think this is probably something that we'll see continuing in the future at the board meetings or in some venue to discuss, various areas of the program and a little more in-depth discussions about certain aspects of the program. And the things that the item today that the report discuss, just a few things to kind of get things started. There's a comparison between the lease purchase program, which was prior to 1998. That was the program we had for school facility funding. And then since 1998, we've had the school facility program. So there's kind of a side-by-side comparison of the general principles and guidelines in each of those programs. It also contains brief summaries of another batch of issues that have been brought up recently, and I'm just going to kind of read through them here. One of them is change of scope guidelines. Change of scope is when you have a project approved from a set of plans and specifications, and then there's some changes that are significant that take place, and how do we handle those things. Also the financial hardship program, I think that's a pretty general statement, but they just want to examine the financial hardship program and how that works as a whole. Also program eligibility. For those, we could talk about eligibility for hours and hours, but it can get very complex, but I think some of the board members wanted to take a look at that and see how it kind of works and maybe if there's some enhancements they could make. Also, they want to take a look at funding for different construction types. So when you're talking about portable buildings versus permanent buildings. A couple of the other things too would be high performance projects. I think we all know that green building concepts are something that's not going to go away. It's very popular right now. It's going to continue to evolve. The technology is through the roof right now. It's a very hot market, and they want to talk about high performance projects. Another one is seismic. Same thing, seismic is very kind of a hot topic right now, and there's a great need out there for seismic funds, so they want to take a look at that program. Another thing mentioned in there is reimbursement projects. Currently, for modernization projects, you can go all the way back to the beginning of the program and get reimbursed for any projects that you've done modernization-wise. And I think you can also get reimbursed per se for new construction projects as long as the buildings aren't occupied. So I think those things will probably come up in that discussion. And then the other things that are mentioned are the complexity of the program, as I mentioned, and how does that translate to our program efficiencies? Does it make it, does it bog it down? Can we make it more efficient? What can we do about the program to make it a little less complex? And also new procedures and new tracking methods and things like that for all the different lists that we have of projects for unfunded approvals and all the different lists that we have. So those are just some of the things that they want to talk about this time. And I'm sure, like I said, it'll be an ongoing thing over the next, into the future. I don't know for how long, but it is something that's going to be discussed, I think, at length by the board and probably by all of us. So we're going to really be examining the program. Okay, this slide is about the State Allocation Board Rules and Procedures Subcommittee. They formed a committee. I believe they met back a few months ago, and there was basically 3 issues that they were asked to address. The first one was the reintroduction of the special consent section of the agenda. And for those of you that remember, a few years ago we used to have a section of our agenda called the consent specials. And what this was were appeals or contentious items that were not solved during the normal processing timelines, during the normal process, and that were elevated to an appeal. Well, oftentimes we'll be able to, through the use of more time and a little more research, we'll be able to come to a conclusion for those issues. We'll be able to reach a consensus with the district and with OPSC, a resolution. And a lot of times, we still need to take those items to the board so that the board is aware of them. They're properly written up and explained how we got to those resolutions. But there is no contention left. The district and the OPSC agree. There's no discrepancies, and so there's not really a need for the board to weigh in on any kind of opinion on making a ruling on the item. And so they were put in the special consent. Recently, we've eliminated the special consent section and just been putting these into the appeals or actions, the actions or the appeals section in our agenda. And the chair and the other members have been moving these non-contentious items into the consent, and they've been voting on it as part of the consent calendar. The subcommittee took a look at this, and they were trying to decide what they wanted to do. And the outcome was that they are going to keep the special consent. This is what they're recommending, I should say. They are going to keep the special consent section retired, but they are saying that they'd like to see these non-contentious items moved into the consent portion of the agenda. So instead of having a separate portion of special consent, it would just be part of the consent agenda. And that's the recommendation. The second thing that they discussed was the structure of recommendations on appeals that go to the board. Currently, the way that, well, let me kind of start with this. Staff is basically the administrative arm of the SAB, and when we take an appeal forward, typically what has happened is that an issue has come up in the project, and staff has denied or augmented the requests from the school district, and that's kind of that's kind of where the OPSC stands on the issue. If we're not able to come to resolution during the appeals process of processing the appeal, we will take an item forward to the board with staff's position, with the district's position, and kind of explaining the issue and the appeal and what happened. If the board does not have 6 affirmative votes to award the district their appeal, then staff's administrative action stands. I think the subcommittee was concerned that it wasn't very clear that if there wasn't enough votes to overturn staff's administrative action, that the appeal would basically go away, that staff's administrative action would stand. And so the recommendation in here is to make changes to the guidelines, the rules and procedures document that we have, and we're also going to change the way that we structure our, if this is approved, we're going to change the way that we structure our recommendations into more like options instead of recommendations. So we will be very clear that it would take 6 affirmative votes from the board members in order to overturn staff's administrative ruling, and that's basically the change. It's just going to very clearly stipulate that it's going to take 6 board votes in order to overturn staff's prior findings, and so that's the second part of this. The third part of this was fairly minor. It was dealt with the formation of working groups. When issues arise at the board, occasionally they will ask staff or stakeholders to go and discuss these issues in a working group. And that's, that's outside of a subcommittee or the implementation committee or the board itself. It's just a working group. And in the past, typically these have taken place, in conference rooms here at the Ziggurat building or offsite somewhere where, stakeholders, OPSC staff, we get together and we brainstorm, we talk about solutions and ideas and recommendations to present to the board in a working group. The only stipulation that the subcommittee wanted to put on these working groups is that they're webcast. And I think, this is probably a good idea. It's probably something we could have thought about a long time ago. It's one of those things that when you see a webcast of something, it's not the same. You don't get the same information, the same kind of feeling that was happening in that meeting by just a narrative summary on a piece of paper. So I think that's the idea here, is to be a little more transparent for everybody to see what happened in these meetings and be able to really kind of tell how the genesis of the recommendations that are coming out of the working groups. So there is an attachment on this item that actually has the rules and procedures document, and it shows all the changes we're making pursuant to what I just discussed. Let's see. This one, I'm going to talk about use of, well, let me back up a little bit. In February of 2012, there was an appeal submitted to the board for a K through 8 school that had an existing multi-purpose room, and they wanted to expand that multi-purpose room to include also gymnasium functionality. It was going to be all one building, but it's going to be a hybrid. It was going to serve multi-purpose room and gymnasium functions. Our regulations didn't really address that situation. They didn't have specifics related to these types of hybrid facilities and also for K through 8 schools. And we heard from numerous places that this was something that was happening a lot out in the school districts in the real world. A lot of elementary schools or middle schools are converting from just serving K through 6 or 7 through 8 or 6 through 8 students to having K through 8. And so that creates a unique set of challenges for them. And they need these facilities. I mean, a lot of times they don't have a lot of extra room on their campuses, or they don't want to make the extra room on their campuses and displace other things like play fields or, whatever it might be, to build these new facilities. Instead, it'd be better just to kind of expand or build a facility that serves both purposes and can kind of be used interchangeably. So we did go to the implementation committee to discuss this. I believe we discussed it over the span of about 3 months. And what this does is it creates regulations to address this need for a hybrid facility for a multi-purpose room and gymnasium. The implementation committee members express interest in exploring other types of combinations, libraries in a gym or other different types of combinations. But we felt that the multi-purpose room gymnasium was the only one where we would have a lot of difficulty really telling where the line would be drawn between the two. And let me just talk about this. So this is only for what we call use of grants requests. And let me talk about use of grants requests for a second here. What a use of grants request is a school district would have new construction eligibility that they would like to use for a facility such as a gym, a library, or a multi-purpose room. For alternative education schools, you can also get conference rooms or resource rooms with a use of grants request. And what it essentially is you're taking pupil grant eligibility that would normally be used to build classrooms, and you're using it instead to build one of these types of facilities, a library, a gym, a multi-purpose, whatever it might be. In order to qualify for that, you have to have a lack of that facility at your current campus. So you have to so let's say you want to build a gym. You don't have a gym at your middle school. You have new construction eligibility. You don't need classrooms right now, so you want to build this gym. You can come in, you can do that. And the way you qualify is if you either don't have one or if the one that you have is undersized. So we took a look at all these different things, and we kind of thought about how we could take the existing structure of the use of grants request and make it work for these hybrid facilities for K through 8 schools and also for high schools or middle schools. And what the outcome was is we came out with a set of regulatory amendments that will give allowances for these hybrid types of facilities. And the way that we arrived at the square footage amounts was to essentially take the gymnasium allowances that are currently in regulations and add space for kitchen functionality and for mechanical and electrical functionality that would probably go along with the kitchen. With the idea being that the main gym space or multi-purpose room space could be shared and used, as the gym or as, maybe a cafeteria throughout different parts of the day. So that's what we came up with. Let's see if I'm missing anything here. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention too, the Department of Education did a study, or they did some research on this side, where they talked to some architects and school districts and looked at some real-world examples of some of these facilities that have been built out there at school districts already in the recent past. And we evaluated those during our implementation committee meetings. We discussed them, and we think that the regulations, in fact, they really compare closely to the actual facilities that were built out there. The regulations that we have that we're presenting to the board are very comparable to what those real-world examples are, and we think that that they are going to work really well for these situations, and hopefully we've addressed the problem. So I think that about covers it. We're hoping to be able to file these regulations with OAL. We hope the board likes them, and moving forward, we should be able to provide these types of facilities in an efficient manner. So if there's no questions, I'm going to introduce Fred Yeager from the Department of Education. He's going to cover some things for CDE.
Good morning. Just a quick update on a couple items today. And the implementation of the recommendations from the UC Berkeley report on K-12 infrastructure that I talked about the last few months, and update on the round 2 of the Green Ribbon Awards. So, okay, whoever put these together put them out of order. I'll fire him when I get back. In any case, on October 1st, we are having a group of stakeholders meet to discuss the recommendations contained in the report. And those recommendations are, as you recall, we talked a bit about those before, and you can read more about these in Dr. Vincent's report, which is on our webpage under What's New. So you can see what his research, findings, and how he came to these recommendations. So just a real quick overview of that. So, all right, and there now. Round 2 of the Green Ribbon Awards. Last year, the U.S. Department of Education instituted a Green Ribbon Award to highlight sustainable efforts by public and private schools in nationwide, and awarded in last Earth Day in April a number of awards, of which California received 4. So the process is, again, very similar to last year, is for a district to submit an application. CD will review that application according to the rubric and forward our nominations to the U.S. Department of Education, who will do a similar analysis. So California may, as well as any other state, submit up to 5 nominees. And there are some limitations. If you submit a certain number, you have to do a private school, some with disadvantaged Title I, AF, free and reduced lunch percentages. And you can see here's the quick timeline. So the web page was updated, I believe that was Monday. So the application is out there, and you have till December 11th to submit. And then the rest of the steps are things that the department and the U.S. Department of Education take care of, ending in a June 3rd recognition party award. The president submitting the awards is yet to be determined, apparently. Not that the president submits it, but you never, Secretary of Education and and the like. So, in general, there are 3 pillars that are used to evaluate the applications: to reduce environmental impact, the health and wellness of the students, and a sustainability education component. STEM being science, technology, engineering, mathematics, civic skills, and pathways. And there in small print is the rubric, but you can certainly see more about that on the web page right there. And the one thing the person preparing the slides didn't put in a slide about upcoming bond elections in November. So there are almost 100 ballot measures for local school districts and community colleges in November for both parcel taxes and general obligation bonds of various types. And the bonds total on the ballot for about $11 billion. So that's a pretty good number for considering the way things are. So we'll find out more about that in 6 weeks or so. So that's all I have is Bill. You're not up, Bill. Nathan. Nate. All righty.
Hi, I'm Nate Gargiulo. I'm from the Office of Public School Construction and the Communications team. I'm just going to go really quickly, Directory of Services, just real quick, just to navigate our website. Sometimes there's a lot of links, a lot of information to kind of wade through to find information that's helpful. So I just wanted to show you really quickly. If you go to our About Us link on the left side, it'll take you to our contact information, where you'll see the address. And as you go down, you'll see by mail, office location, by telephone. But what's really helpful at the very bottom of this is you're going to see project manager district assignments, which are actually really helpful. When you pull this up here, you're going to see it by county. So if you have any general questions about any projects that you're submitting to OPSC, you can find who your project manager is, their phone number, their email. We really want to encourage districts to be able to reach out to their project manager to ask questions by phone or email address, make it an easy process. So we just want to stress that that's available to districts to be able to use. In general, we have our employee phone list I think everybody's familiar with. We have our Directory of Services as well. If we click on that, pull that up. Just very general stuff here again. The different positions, contact information. This is just all, again, it's on our About Us link on the left side of the OPSC website on the homepage. And that's about it that I have. It's just a general reminder that if you want to be able to contact your project manager by county, by phone or email, it's readily available to you. Thank you. And now I've got Bill, it's your turn now. I promise.
All right, thank you, Nate. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to give you an update on, first of all, the Implementation Committee of the State Allocation Board. We met in September on the 7th, and we spent a good morning looking at the project information worksheet, which districts now fill out for new construction projects, and the board has asked us to look at adding modernization to the PIW. And this is the third time we've looked at it. And OPSC brought some updated proposals and a new way of presenting the workflow, if you will, for how the PIW might be filled out by a school district, including inputting building data and scope of work information. And they brought a new option for collecting cost data using the CSI category. CSI is the Construction Specifications Institute, and it's an industry standard division of work that staff brought for this meeting. This is one of the roadmaps or flowcharts that staff presented to the Implementation Committee. And if you can't read the fine print on this chart, you can go on the web, watch the webcast, or see this up on the website at a later date. But the point being here is that a district would fill out basic cost information, project information on the first page, and then go to the second page of the PIW to start to input data related to the facilities that were modernized, answer a series of questions which would take them one way or the other on the flowchart. So, for example, if you replace a building, you answer yes. Did you replace a building? Like-in-kind replacement is an allowable project under modernization. If you answer yes to that, you would go down one track and describe the buildings replaced and the new buildings put in place. If you answered no, you'd go to then the description of the buildings modernized in this particular map. Before you did that, the first step was to input the type of school, the number of students attending, and this was the area at the bottom of this slide that you can see that staff proposed using the Construction Specification Institute 16 division setup to have districts then look at their project based upon the costs in each of the divisions. And so this was the proposal that OPSC brought to the meeting at our last meeting in September. Then they ran us through, if you did a building replacement, then you would look at not only what type of building was replaced, but also why did you replace the building, and then the new building, what was the type of building that you built in place of the old one, the construction type, total square footage, and then if there was additional modernization work, you would go on to the next step in the flow chart, and you would also get to this page, this workflow section, if you just modernized a building. So name of building, so basic building information, name of the building, what was it used for, classrooms, multipurpose, or gym, construction type, number of stories, year originally built, year last modernized, total square footage, type of work done, and there'd be a drop-down list under type of work done, and that would take you to this page. So we, working with staff, came up with a proposed structure of type of work that tried to capture some of the basic elements that districts do. For example, ADA compliance, structural seismic upgrades, roof replacement, building exterior systems, etc. So this is an attempt to capture scope of work information for modernization so that the state can have this type of information from the PIW. There was a lot of input back from the committee. First, that there was a general agreement that the CSI format probably wasn't a very appropriate way to ask for information, partly because it's not, it would require essentially deconstructing a lot of data that the districts have to try and put it into that. A lot of work. Public doesn't understand the CSI formats potentially. There were concerns about the level of information of detail required from the stakeholders, thinking that potentially it was a little bit too much work to put all this in. There was a request to simplify the approach to a higher level and collect site-wide or project-wide information rather than building-wide information. So staff is wrestling. It was a kind of frustrating meeting, I think, in some ways for the staff, but they're trying to find the right balance between the need for data, including cost information, and a simple process that doesn't require districts to spend a lot of time filling out an additional form. So we're going to go through this process one more time at our next implementation committee meeting on October 12th, and it'll be here in the state capitol. Next, I want to give you a brief report to end up our meeting today on the State Allocation Board's Audit Subcommittee. The Audit Subcommittee met on August 27th, 2012, and the Audit Subcommittee was presented with information that has been the subject of a number of meetings of the Audit Working Group. So we have State Allocation Board, Audit Subcommittee, Audit Working Group of the Audit Subcommittee. The working group is composed of stakeholders, of experts in the field, including auditors, and they have been working with OPSC staff that's been coordinated by Rick Asbell and Steve Inman, who I think is here today. They've done a great job of working with the working group. So what was presented to the Audit Subcommittee of the board was a new approach using a consolidated incremental compliance check. In other words, the issue that districts face and that the state faces is audits happen at the end of a project, and sometimes you make certifications and they're not checked for 4 to 6 years down the line. And if there's been a problem with the certification or an issue and it's not captured over that time frame, there end up being significant potential interest penalties, etc. And so the board had asked for us to look at a way that we could accelerate the review of certifications. And so what was proposed was an 18-month consolidated incremental compliance check where all of the things that happen currently at the 12-month and 18-month periods. So At 12 months, a district submits their first 5006, and then at 18 months, the 5006 is your detailed project, it's your first expenditure report from the district. But at 18 months, you then submit a substantial progress report to the state. It's proposed then to consolidate those at 18 months. This is what was presented to the subcommittee in a single compliance check, and to check all of the certifications or a sampling of certifications at that time as part of that. Probably the most basic proposal that is being presented here to the audit subcommittee was that their proposal would provide for external audits of school facility program projects rather than ongoing reviews by OPSC. So this, and the proposal from the audit working group was to use the district's annual education audit or their regular fiscal audit that's done under the auspices of the Education Audit Appeals Panel, EAAP, which is composed of the Department of Finance, the State Controller's Office, and the California Department of Education. So this proposal would include the development of an audit guide and on an annual basis updated with OPSC input about the scope of work that would be audited for school facilities program projects. Now, at the end of the project, when the district filed their final 5006 and indicated the project was complete, OPSC would still have the responsibility to reconcile all the costs on the final expenditure report, not duplicating work that's been audited already, but reconciling the final expenditure report and then closing the project out, and any adjustments or as a result of the reconciliation that needed to go back to the State Allocation Board would go back, whether there was an adjustment upward or downward in the amount of funds that went to the project. So we also talked about what were the triggers for beginning the final review by OPSC. The concern there is that the length of time it takes for projects to be audited, and OPSC is looking at ways that we can present updated triggers and shorten the period to begin final review. Right now, if a district says that they are complete on their project, OPSC has 2 years to begin audit. The proposal here that's presented to the audit subcommittee was 1 year rather than 2. And my next slide is notoriously unreadable to the members of the audience. However, you can see this on the website. It's a flow chart that indicates what was presented, the proposed process for SFP review and audits, and it's just what I covered on the previous slide. So we got a lively discussion from the audit subcommittee members, and they first of all asked, why were we thinking of 18 months and not 12 months? Let's start all of our certification reviews as early as possible. So they asked us to look at that. So we're going to go back to our audit working group and look at a 12-month review, initiation of certification review rather than 18. They also noted, and OPSC presented, that there are a total of, somebody can help me if I misspeak, 68, 67 different certifications that a school district makes on the 5004 and the 5005, which are the application for funding and the fund release application. Which one of those certifications are the priorities that need to be checked? The subcommittee wants to know that, so we're going to go look at that again. But really, the biggest issue that was raised by the audit subcommittee was, why are we not considering using the Proposition 39 performance audits rather than the district's fiscal audit or education audit as a vehicle for including the school facilities program scope and audit scope? And so the board members that were on the audit subcommittee noted that these audits are already being done by many districts, and they thought it would enhance accountability because they're focused on school facilities issues already, and that it would streamline the process. So we have a meeting set up now for Tuesday, October 9th at 10 a.m. in the Capitol, room 447. And we're going to look at the issues raised by the subcommittee in their last meeting. We're going to bring forward a panel of Prop 39 performance audit and bond audit experts to make presentations and have a dialogue with the members of the audit working group. So, for example, we're going to bring the executive director of the California League of Bond Oversight Committees to talk about bond oversight committee responsibilities in performance audits. We're going to bring a school district representative who's had a lot of experience implementing these. We're going to bring a performance auditor who does Prop 39 audits. And we're going to bring an attorney in to talk about the regulatory and statutory issues that underlay the Prop 39 performance audit. So we think it'll be another lively dialogue related to continuing to discuss accountability issues in the school facilities program, and it's a very interesting process, and I appreciate the hard work of everybody who's been involved. One of our audit work group members is here today, Letty Boggs from Colby Technologies, and she's been a bulwark of the working group. So that's my report for today, and I think that we are done. Signing off. Thank you very much.